Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where it is a very cold day today, Hinokicho Park. I'm outside here at the park, kind of having just eaten my lunch and enjoying the fresh air. It's quite cold, as you can tell. I'm wearing my winter parka here, not something that I normally drag out, not even in the winter time. But this has been an especially tough week when it comes to weather here in Japan. It's been a little while since I last made a video, and I apologize for that. Last week we were up in Hokkaido enjoying the snow and doing a little bit of skiing. And while we were up there, we managed to experience some weather which was nearly 20 degrees below zero, which is quite cold even by Hokkaido standards. And as if that wasn't bad enough, that cold weather managed to come down to Honshu as well. And cold weather records were broken all across Japan last week. Not my favorite kind of winter. I'm not a big fan of the cold weather. But on the positive side, the plum blossoms are starting to bloom here at the park, which they do this time of year. And that's our first sign that spring is on its way and will eventually get here. And I'm really looking forward to warmer weather. So let's go ahead and get started with the subject of today's video. And today I'm going to be talking about yet another Nikon camera. This is not your typical Nikon camera. It doesn't actually say Nikon anywhere on this camera except for the filter. This is a Nikkormat camera. This was also called the Nikkormat, depending on which country you happen to live in. The Nikkormats were sold in Japan, and Nikkormats were sold everywhere else. This was kind of a consumer-oriented camera, which was widely used by professionals, and it was produced from about 1965 or so until 1977 or 78. So it had a really long production run, and it was quite a popular camera, not produced in really huge numbers, but these cameras were quite rugged and reliable, and if you bought one, you didn't have to buy another one 4 or 5 years later down the road, and maybe that's why they didn't make so many. And when people got these cameras, they found that they just worked well, and they just kept using them until they got eventually tired of them and moved on to something else. So there were a few variations of these cameras which came out. The first one was known as the FT, and then there was a new version which was called the FTN, and there was even an even newer version, and there was a simplified version which didn't have a built-in light meter. There were quite a variety of these cameras made, and they came in 2 different colors. You could get them in the chrome-plated silver finish like this one here, or you could get them in the black paint finish. Both cameras are equally nice. In the case of the FT, I think I prefer the silver version to the black version, which is kind of odd because I kind of prefer the black version in most other cameras. Nowadays they have a camera which is called the DF, which is the Digital F Nikon, which is kind of a recreation of the earlier Nikon bodies. And a lot of people think that the camera is styled a lot like the 80s FE, FM, FE2 series. Personally, when I hold that camera and I hold one of these cameras, it reminds me more of the FT series than the F Alphabet series, or the later ones. Just the way that it feels and the way it handles. It doesn't handle like an FE or FM, it handles more like an FT. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the FT. And I really wanted to do a video about this camera because it's a really unique camera and quite different from a lot of the other Nikons which we have grown used to over the years. We'll go ahead and take a look at the top, and the first thing you notice about the top is it has kind of an unusual layout compared to the other Nikon cameras, like the F, the F2, the FE, FM, FA, FGE, and all that. It's kind of a unique design. The first thing we have over here is the rewind knob with a pop-out lever, and it's kind of knurled around here, so you can use it without the lever if you like. What's cool about this camera, one of the first things, is this window up here, which is an external light meter window. And with this window, you can see what the light meter settings, or you can adjust your shutter and aperture and see what your settings are doing by looking in this window. Now this is really handy if you have the camera mounted somewhere low on a tripod or you're doing macro photography. This feature was available on, say, the F Photomic and F2 Photomic cameras, but wasn't available on the other cameras which were produced in the 80s. You couldn't get this on, say, the FE or excuse me, F3, F4, or 5 or 6. It's kind of unique to the F2 Photomic and the FTN. It's quite simple to use. There's a circle right in the middle, a little round circle, and a needle which moves back and forth. And what you do is you simply move the shutter speed ring, and this has the shutter speed ring around the lens. It's not on the top like you would find on other cameras, and the aperture ring. And when you move the shutter speed ring and the aperture ring, to the right combination, the meter needle will line up in the center of the circle, and that way you know you have a properly exposed photograph. A pretty cool feature. Over here on the top we have a non-removable prism. This is a fixed prism like the later, say, F series cameras. And this one is fitted with an accessory finder for mounting a flash or an accessory viewfinder. You can easily remove this by unscrewing the eyepiece and taking it off and just removing it. I think it looks better without the flash shoe on it, but you know, for those of you who want to use a flash on this camera, you'll have to get one with the flash shoe. Over here we have this button, which looks a lot like a shutter release button, but this is actually a depth of field preview button. And when you depress this, you can see that aperture blades are opening and closing. And what this allows you to do is preview your depth of field, obviously. And you can also use this for a stop-down metering if you're using a few of these odd and unusual lenses which you can get in the F mount. I've often seen lenses, you know, Zeiss or these odd variety of old folding camera lenses which are adapted to the F mount and which you can mount on these cameras, and it's really interesting what the kind of stuff you can use on these cameras which have the Nikon F mount. But anyway, moving on, we have the film counter dial here, which has a magnifier on it so you can see it quite easily. We have the shutter release button, and this button is threaded for a standard cable release. It's not like the F where you actually had to have a special cable or adapter to use it. You can use any cable release on this one except for the one which was specifically made for the F. Here we have the film winding and shutter charging dial, and this also acts as the power switch for the camera. When you pull back on the winding lever and you expose the red dot here, that activates the power to the light meter, and then you can go ahead and set your exposure. This camera has an unusual shutter compared to some of the other older cameras, the professional F series, which used a horizontal titanium shutter. This camera features a vertical shutter, which is for a lot of people a more accurate system or a more reliable system. Nikon eventually moved to vertical shutters in their later cameras, and this allowed for things like higher flash sync speed. It's an interesting system, and it's kind of a good system because there's less motion in the camera. When the shutter is moving horizontally and the metal barrels or rollers are moving the shutter curtains, it can cause a little bit of motion in the camera. The vertical shutter kind of gets rid of this problem. Not that it's a real problem. In a camera this heavy, you're probably not going to notice it, but it's an interesting feature, and it was the first Nikon camera to come with this shutter. I like the shutter for how quiet and smooth it is. This is a nice smooth winding camera and nice quiet actuation. You probably can't hear it so much that I'm firing it because of all the background noise around me, but it is a really nice quiet and smooth operating shutter. Moving to the back of the camera, we have pretty much nothing here. Very simple, no card holders or anything like that. All we have is the viewfinder eyepiece. This is a nice large viewfinder, and if you look through it, you'll notice it has a really nice field of view, and the viewfinder in these is especially bright. It's really easy to use. There were a couple of variations. One is a kind of a multi-prism center focusing screen, and the other focusing screen is kind of a split prism. The split prism one is the optional one, but both work quite well. I actually prefer the standard one which comes in these cameras. The viewfinder eyepiece is large enough to see it pretty easily if you're wearing eyeglasses or whatever, or sunglasses. And if you can also find interchangeable eyepieces which allow you to change the diopter, so you can adjust this camera to match your eyesight so you don't have to wear glasses when you're shooting with it. On the bottom here we have the battery cap, and this is kind of an odd thing. This one turns actually the wrong way to remove it. Maybe the right way if you think backwards like I sometimes do. Instead of turning it and unscrewing it lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, it's righty-loosey and lefty-tighty. And it just turns like a half turn or so and pops out, and you'll see the battery chamber. This camera uses an MR9 battery, or it originally used an MR9 battery. You can use a PX625 alkaline battery, or a wine cell, or an LR44 battery with an adapter. Quite easy. I like how well made the battery chamber and electronics were for this camera. The light meters in these usually work pretty well. It's not often that I come across one where it doesn't work. Over here we have a standard 1/4-inch tripod socket, and over here we have the release button which you have to depress in order to rewind the film. While we're looking at the bottom of the camera, we have a scale of numbers going across the bottom, and this is where you program your film speed. So when you load film into the camera, you take a note of what speed film it is, and then you just turn the dial here on the bottom until it matches the film speed you have loaded inside. And we have a full range of speeds here from ASA 12 to 1600, which is more than suitable for the modern films we have available today. We'll go ahead and flip the camera around, and I mentioned before that the viewfinder in this camera is nice and bright. It has a meter reading in the viewfinder as well, and it works on the same principle as the external finder. As you turn the aperture and aperture ring and shutter speeds, you can line up the needle in the middle of the meter, and it has a handy plus and minus system on the top. And this allows you to set for a little bit of overexposure or underexposure, depending on if you're shooting at people, like skiing in the snow, or shooting at someone wearing a black coat, and you want the snow to look white and the coat to look black. It's a very good feature and very simple to use. On this part here, we have this lever here, and this is the mirror lockup lever. And when you push this downward, this allows the mirror to lock up. And the system was put in the camera because Nikon still had some of its old lenses which had kind of a deep element. The 2.1 centimeter wide angle lens, as well as some of the fisheye lenses, required that the mirror be locked up in order to use them. Later lenses didn't have weren't designed the same way, so you could use them without the mirror lockup. But this feature allows you to use the old lenses if you happen to come across one in, say, a thrift store or pawn shop or something like that. Here we have the release button for releasing the lens. And an oddball thing about this lens is the way that you have to release it. You have to, when you install a new lens, you have to make sure that this pin here lines up with what they call rabbit ears on these old Nikon lenses. You put the lens on, make sure that the rabbit ears line up, and then you lock the lens over to the left-hand side. That's not all you have to do with these lenses, because there's a field of travel for the light meter sensor in here, and what you have to do is you have to turn the aperture ring back and forth to center the light meter mechanism, so it's reading the aperture of the lens correctly. You'll kind of feel it the first time you mount the lens and you turn it. You can kind of feel the tension, and then when you operate it after that, you don't feel the tension anymore. They do this because Nikon lenses came in a variety of different apertures. This one here is an f2 to f16 lens. Some of Nikon's lenses came with an f1.4 or f1.2 lens, and some of them came with an f22 aperture. So in order to use these different lenses, of course, the camera has to be able to adapt to use them. This is kind of a primitive system. Nowadays we would consider it a primitive system, but back in those days it was actually quite an advanced system. So it's just something to keep in mind when you were shooting one of these cameras and you're actually changing from one lens to another lens. Normally with one of these cameras I would kind of stick to maybe just two lenses in my system. I would have a 50mm lens and say a 28mm lens. I like the field of view for the 28mm lens, really good for street photography and especially here in Japan, shooting indoors. And of course the 50mm lens for most everything else. But when you change the lens, you just have to make sure to turn the aperture ring to set the light meter. Over here we have the self-timer, and we have the same self-timer system which we have on the older Nikons, a nice rugged reliable self-timer system, and you can kind of see it move. There are no LEDs or beepers or anything on this camera. From a distance you can just see it working the way it's supposed to work. And you can see the shutter speed selection here. There's a black dot here which lets you know which speed you have selected. We have a full range of shutter speeds from bulb and 1 second to 1/1000th of a second, and that was pretty much par for the course back in the mid-late 1960s. And as I said before, the vertical shutter on this camera is very rugged, reliable, and very accurate. You're going to get really good exposures with one of these cameras if you get one which is in any kind of decent condition. Now, these cameras, in my title I mentioned this is one of the best bargain Nikon cameras, and that is because this one doesn't have the cult status which cameras like the F and F2 have, or the expensive technical features which you find on the F3. It's kind of like the forgotten Nikon camera. and it's kind of a shame because it really is a cool camera. I really love the rugged feel, the solidness of this camera, the reliability, and just the overall simplicity of it. This was made back in the days when we were kind of reaching the height of mechanical engineering and when electronic engineering was just starting to take off. So this camera is kind of like a milestone of mechanical engineering, and when we come to later cameras like the ones we have today, of course, now we have like the ultimate in digital or electronics technology. A lot of people prefer the feel and the sound of a solid mechanical camera, and this one won't let you down if that's what you're looking for. The great thing about this camera, the F mount is of course the best feature because it allows you to use so many different kinds of lenses. For myself, as I said, I normally use two lenses mainly, the 28mm and 50mm lens. But once in a while I kind of get this crazy itch to go out and shoot unusual things like birds or animals or things like that. And I have an old 50-300 zoom, and that's a really cool lens which I love. And also my daughter's been really interested in taking photographs of the moon recently. And I've been trying to get an old 1000mm mirror lens to kind of work and get pictures of the moon. So you have a world of options when it comes to a camera like this, despite its age and its simplicity. But anyway, it's getting a little bit late now. The battery's getting a little bit low on my camera here, so I'm going to go ahead and cut off the show. I'll be posting more videos as I make them. I know I said recently that I would be making more videos sooner. Unfortunately, our trip to Hokkaido kind of delayed my making more videos, but now I'm back and hopefully I'll be able to get some more put out. For those of you who are new to my channel, I sell cameras like this one here in my online store, JapanVintageCamera.com. I have an Etsy store which is also called Japan Vintage Camera. If you'd like to buy this camera or another one, please visit one of my stores. I'll post links to my stores in the description below the video. If you'd like to see more videos, please subscribe. And if you click the like button, that really helps us out. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.